Folks, welcome back to the Bobby Bo Show. On today's episode, you're going to learn why moving the F-pawn is a bad idea if you don't know what you're doing. Because once you move the F-pawn, you lose an important defender of the king. Even after they castle, the king will be on G1, and then this diagonal will be weak to your bishop and your queen, as you will see in these 3 Caro Kann games that I compiled, and they all share this common theme of exploiting the weakness after they play the F-pawn. And I try to make these compilation videos with similar themes so that you can recognize patterns and learn easier. So even if you've seen some of these episodes before, I think you might find this even more useful if you want to get better at chess. So smash like if you want more theme compilations, and finally, please enjoy the Bobby Bo Show. Folks, welcome back to the Bobby Bo Show. Here's the moves it starts with. It's another Caro Kann. And they're going to advance the pawn, and I will advance my c-pawn. Now they play f4. It's a pretty uncommon move, but it's not terrible. It's just not the best move for white. I play knight to c6, and now they take my pawn. Now e6 opens up my bishop and attacks the pawn, and now they play queen to g4. Because if my bishop takes here, they can take this pawn, and then my rook's gone. I have to think about what to do, and after 5 seconds, I play knight to h6. Because it attacks the queen, and where does the queen go? Well, if it goes back here, then I go knight to f5, attacking the queen again, and defending the g7 pawn, and then I can take the pawn here. But they play knight to h5, and this is a pretty typical beginner mistake of playing too many queen moves in the beginning, instead of developing your knights and your bishops. Also, they played their f-pawn, which, I mean, it's just not a good idea in general, unless you have a specific purpose. And you'll see the engine says -2. Even after I take this pawn and the material is even. But it gets even worse for them once they play g4. Just kind of adding on to their mistake here of moving the queen and the pawns out too early, because they're not developing and they're not thinking about their king's safety. So what do you do here? Well, it looks like they might be trying to attack my knight or something, but I'm just going to go here if they do, and there's no problems. So I'm not worried about anything over there actually. And I can play this move, queen to b6. And look, I'm about to check their king right here. And if I don't checkmate you, you're at least going to have no king safety and no piece development. So now they're in trouble. The engine says -3, but I haven't secured the advantage yet. And now they finally play a knight move, knight to f3, developing their knight. But now I can play bishop to f7 check, and the king is stuck in the middle, can't castle, and it's going to be a pretty easy game for me. But actually, the engine says the best move, slightly better, is bishop to e3. And let's look at it here. If they take with their bishop, I take back with the queen here. Now it's getting even worse for them. They block with the bishop here. And what do you do here? How do you continue the attack? Well, if you said knight to d4, you lost because the knight takes here. So find a different move. Knight to b4? Okay, not bad. But knight to a3 now. Defending it. And then you have to do what you should have done anyway, which is develop your light squared bishop. But how do you do it? Well, the best move now is b6, and you're bringing your bishop to a6, and then you're checkmating on e2. So they have to defend against that. Well, they either play knight to d2 or knight to c3. Engine likes knight to d2, and then they play c4 here. But I think players I would play against would probably play knight to c here, just to defend with the knight. And then you play bishop to a6, and this is even worse for them, because their best move is g5. But now I go knight f5, and it's still even material. But -5 on the engine evaluation. Here we go, knights are coming to here. You can't stop it. Only one knight defending the square here. Also, I could just push this pawn, and if your knight moves, it's checkmate. So king to f1, now the bishop can move. But now I have g6 attacking your queen. Where's the queen go? Engine says best move h3, bringing it back to defend the king. But now the knights come in, knight c to d4, and if this knight takes, the queen gets taken. Oh no, your bishop. But now knight captures f3. Now I'm about to play knight to d2 check, and then I'll take their queen. If the queen goes to g2, this is checkmate unless the queen takes. So they have to take, and then they lose their queen. And finally you're up material. But if instead they go queen to g4, now you play h5. And where does the queen go? Well, if it goes back to where it was, then you play knight to d2 check and take the queen. And none of these squares are safe. So you can't save your queen here. Actually, the best move is just bishop back to e2. And now you just take the queen. Okay, now the king defends the queen. But now f4, and you're up a pawn. Engine evaluation still -5, so we're getting there. Okay, now they can finally bring their rook into the game. Let's say rook to d1. But now knight to h4 check. And where does the king go? Well, you have to take the knight with the queen. and then lose your queen, because if the king goes to g1, it's checkmate in 2 moves. What's the checkmate? Quickly find it. And it's queen to d4 check. Knights are blocking these squares. Only move that stops checkmate is queen to e3. And it's game over. So that's why bishop to e3 is better here. But instead, I played bishop to e2 check, and it's still winning, but not quite as good. Now they play king to d1, and I play knight to d4. Losing my advantage here, but they have to play the right move. I should have been getting my other bishop out, but instead, now they play knight captures d4, and after I take back with my queen, they can take a slight advantage by playing bishop to d3. But instead, they played knight to d2, the second best move, but now I'm holding on to a slight advantage here. And again, I need to get my bishop out and bring another piece into the attack. But instead I say, hey, let me take this pawn here. And once again, if they bring their light squared bishop out, then they have a chance here. But instead, they play knight to c4. And it looks like I'm in trouble here. My queen is now under attack by the bishop. This knight's defended by the bishop here too. They're about to come here and check my king, maybe even checkmate me. But what did they miss? Well, now I can just check the king. Before, the knight was on this square, defending here, and blocking this check, but they completely missed that after they move their knight, they're no longer defending those squares. And I can play queen to f3 check, forking the king and the rook. Knight's still under attack, and they play bishop to e2, and it's checkmate in 6 moves. Queen captures h1, taking the rook, now I'm up +6. King to d2, and now it's checkmate in 3 moves. But instead of finding the checkmate, I just took the knight, because I thought that was pretty easy. But can you find the checkmate? I'll give you a couple seconds to hit the like button. And it's bishop to e1 check. If the king goes to d1, it's checkmate. And if the king goes to d3 or e3, it's also checkmate. But instead I took the knight, and they played g5, attacking my knight now. But I play queen to d5 check, bishop defending these squares. King has to go to c3 and get checkmated, or block with the bishop. And before I take the bishop, I can just move my knight to safety because the bishop's not going anywhere. And now king to e2, attacking my bishop. But I'm up +9, so let's trade material. I take their bishop. They decide to take back with the pawn. And now I play bishop to g3 here, getting my bishop to safety, because if the pawn takes, I fork the king and the queen. So instead, they play queen to h3. And now, once again, they can't stop checkmate. Knight to d4, king to d2, and they resigned. About to be checkmate. It says checkmate in 6 moves after queen to a5 check, b4, take it, king to e3, queen to e1 check, king captures d4, oh no, my knight. But now bishop captures e5 check, and after king to c5, you have queen to c3 check. And it's checkmate after king to b5, bishop to d7. Your first time moving the light squared bishop, and it's checkmate. So they resigned here. And that was the end of the game. And that's probably when they started to regret playing queen to g4, because instead they could have played bishop to e3, defending the pawn here. So I played d4, attacking the bishop and getting ready to take the pawn. Bishop goes back to f2, and now I take the pawn. But now they have knight to d2. And their plan here is to bring the knight to b3 and attack the pawn, and eventually they're going to take this pawn and be up a pawn here. So let's see how the development goes. Knight to e7, queen to f3, and now they're going to castle queenside, add the rook to the attack. Bishop to d7, castles, castles. Now knight to b3, as I said earlier, and the pawn is under attack 3 times. Also, my bishop is under attack, so I play b6 to defend it. And now they can play knight to e2, adding even another attacker, and continuing development. Queen to c7, getting my queen out of the way of the rook, and also putting it in line with the king. But now they take the pawn that I could not defend, and they're up a pawn. I can trade knights here, and then play rook to c8, lining it up with the king. And if it were my turn right now, I could take this knight, and if the bishop or the rook takes back, I have checkmate. So they have to play bishop to d3, and now we trade bishops. Bishop to b5, and they can't take because it's checkmate. So bishop to e4, attacking my rook. So bishop to c6 to get in the way. And now we trade bishops. And because they developed their piece earlier, instead of playing queen to g4, now we have an even game with a slight advantage for white. They're up a pawn, but more importantly, they didn't lose. So they probably regret that. Hit the like button. Folks, welcome back to the Bobby Bo Show. Here's the moves it starts with. It's another Caro Kann, and after knight to c3, d captures e4, knight captures e4, I play knight to f6. And now the main line is just a take here. And after I take back with my center pawn, they double up my pawns here. But instead, they play the worst chess move in general, which is moving their f-pawn. They play f3. And why is this the worst move in general? Sometimes f3 is a good move, but not now. The engine already likes me, and it's because every time you play f3, you're weakening the king on the diagonals here. If the king castles, now you're weak on this diagonal. Maybe I take this pawn with check later, and now the knight usually comes to f6, but now the knight can't come to f6, so it has to go here, and it takes longer for the knight to come into the game, and all of the weaknesses combined just makes the f-pawn a little bit of a bad move, most of the time, and this is one of those times. So keep an eye on these diagonals, and remember that the king is very weak whenever you see the f-pawn move forward, and they really want me to take their knight here so they can take back with their pawn, and then I have 2 pawns in the center here, but I'm not forced to take back with their knight. I'm actually wanting them to take my knight. So I just play bishop to f5 here, attacking the knight, but now they play bishop to d3, defending the knight, and that's an inaccuracy because now this is a free pawn. But I missed that. Instead, I'm just thinking about developing and castling, so I play e6 so my bishop can come out. And now knight captures f6, queen captures f6, and we trade pieces. So there goes the knights and the bishops, but now my queen is in the middle of the board. Their king is still in the center. I'm getting ready to castle soon, and maybe I'm targeting this pawn too. So this queen's doing a lot, but I need to get my other pieces out, and so do they. So they play knight to e2, and then bishop to d6, and I'm getting ready to castle. My bishop is now in line with the king if they castle. And now, instead of castling, which they should do, they play c4 first. I don't know why. What does c4 accomplish here? I guess they're trying to go here, but why don't they just do c4 later? Maybe the knight's coming to here and they didn't want to block it off. But they need to castle. King safety. Their king's already weak on these diagonals, but I castle. Now, once again, instead of castling, knight to c3. They haven't moved their bishop or their queen or their rooks or castled yet. They've moved their knight a couple times now, when it should have just been on f6 the entire time. And here c5 is pretty strong because we want to break open the middle and attack the king while they're not castled. But instead, I'm trying to finish development. So knight to d7. Now the knight can come up. And after b3, getting ready to fianchetto the bishop instead of castling, my best move is just probably e5 or knight f6, continuing development because the knight's not really doing anything back here. But also, I haven't moved this rook yet. Last piece I haven't moved. And if the rook goes to d8, it's in line with their queen here. And if I bust open the middle soon, that queen could be in danger. Knight to f6, bishop moves sometime, you know. So setting up tactics. And now once again, instead of castling, which would be the best move, bishop to b2. What are you doing? You need to castle. But that's 1,400 rated players for you. What's your rating? Let me know in the comment section. Maybe I'll show you how to beat your rating level. But now knight to f6. And the engine says -2 already for me. That's an advantage, a winning advantage. Even though the material is still even, because they haven't castled yet. And what do you think their best move is? Castling. But do you think they're going to castle? No, they play g4, attacking my queen here. Oh my goodness. And this pawn's defended by the queen. And now I have to decide where to move my queen. But they really are doubling down on this kingside weakness here. They haven't castled yet. The middle is open. Maybe they're going to castle queenside, but I don't think that's safe either. And they're just further weakening their kingside. Like if I had my queen on h4, that'd be a check that they couldn't block with this pawn now. And they're trying to be too fancy, when really the best moves are actually just the most common sense, basic chess development, good chess principles. And this isn't really about knowing an opening. This is just about knowing basic chess opening principles, like castling and moving all your pieces out. But your queen is under attack, and hopefully you thought about where to move it. And of course, the most logical square is just to move it forward to f4. Queen to f4, right? Such an active spot, hitting the pawn in the middle here. This a2 pawn, still hitting the pawn here on f3. And just an active diagonal, right? Maybe you're going to check the king here. So f4, probably the first move you considered. But before you think about moves, think about where they can go. So if I go queen to f4, can they attack my queen on the next move? And of course, yes, knight to e2, right? Hitting the queen. That blocks the pawn now. You can just take the pawn if they play knight to e2. So queen to f4 is pretty good, right? And I almost played it. And right before I let go of the piece, I remembered sometimes bishops move backwards. So I said, let's think about that real quick. What if they play bishop to c1 after I play queen to f4, attacking my queen? Then where do I move next? And there's no squares to go to. So my queen would be trapped if I played queen to f4. And I realized that right before I let go of it. And instead I played the best move, queen to g5. And now the threat is queen to h4. But all they could think about was bishop to c1, trying to trap my queen. And after bishop to c1, I just played queen to h4 check. They can't block it, so king to d2. And they're trying to run away. So the most obvious move, queen to f2 here, and that's what I'm going to play here so the king cannot move backwards. But really, there's a better move here. And I'm just going to play queen to f2 check and then take the pawn here check, right? And I think that's good because then I can open up the pieces. But if I just play e5, then I can break open the middle, get both the rooks in, all the pieces come up, And that's just the best move here. And queen to f2 is still winning, but it's just a little bit less winning. And I still have to play a good game. And after they play queen to e2 to block, now I play queen to d4 check. And now my attack just can't happen yet because it's harder for me to get all my pieces in. And if the queen was on d8 instead, then it would be in line with my rook, and their rook couldn't slide over. So it would just be way better if the queen was on d8 and I played e5 first. But now the king can get out, and after king to c2, their king is still not safe. I'm up a pawn. They haven't developed their rooks or their bishop, but I should still be winning. But I had to figure it out, and I played bishop to b4, hitting the knight now, threatening to take and win material. So they play bishop to b2, defending it. Now I want to get my queen out of the way of the bishop, so queen to f4, back to a good square. But now bishop to c1 attacks my queen, and I need to just go back to queen to b7. But first, I go back to d4. And after bishop to b2, I think about it for a little bit, and then I realize what I need to do, and that's just to play a winning endgame when I'm up a pawn and I'm more developed. I'm going to try to trade off all the pieces and get my rooks on this open file and get everything behind the pawns, try to trade off pieces, and try to promote. So really, my queen does need to be on c7 here. So after bishop captures c3, bishop captures c3, I go back to f4, planning on coming back to c7. And I probably had a winning attack there if I didn't trade off material, but definitely an easier endgame for me. And after bishop to d2, attacking my queen, I'm just going to go back to c7 like I planned here. But there's actually just rook takes bishop here. I can just take it. And that might seem like a bad trade, rook for bishop. But my next move is queen captures f3 after the queen moves. And it still seems like a bad trade, but now the knight can come to e4, the rook can come up and over. And with the right moves, I'm going to force them to give material back, and I'm going to be winning. But I did not calculate this, didn't even think about it, just went ahead with my plan here and played queen to c7. And I'm about to double up my rooks and try to trade everything off. And after bishop to c3, it seems like they want to take my knight, double up my pawns, open up my king, maybe create some weaknesses on my own king. But all the pieces are getting traded off. This is just helping me with my plan here. And after rook to d7, about to double up, they take my knight, and it's a big mistake. Now it says I'm crushing, minus 1.5 on the engine, because after g captures f6, plus one pawn, but it's a winning endgame. And if I could just double up my rooks right now, it would be devastating. So they have to stop that with rook a to d1 here. But now the rooks are doubled up. Great move here. And I'm trying to trade everything down and then take this pawn on h2. And they see me threatening this h2 pawn perhaps, and they want to try to push these pawns down, so they play h4. But now let's just trade all the rooks off, and they have to take with the king here, but they take with the queen. Either way, still losing, but now queen to h2 check. Great move, hitting the king and the pawn. They block with the queen here. Best move, just to take the pawn. But is it really the best move? Sure, but you can just take their queen right now, and after they take back with their king, it's just a winning game. You're up a pawn, and it's a winning king and pawn endgame. And maybe you don't see why it's winning yet, but we're about to see, because I have 4 pawns and a king versus 3 pawns, and there's 3 pawns versus 3 pawns here, so no worries. And their king is all the way back here. My king's coming up, king to g7, and we're just going to run it down. And after king to e3, there's no stopping you, unless you throw the game with b5, because you're terrible at endgames, and you don't realize that now they can just play king to d4, and then they're taking your pawns and promoting, and you're going to promote too, but it's going to be a draw. So don't throw the game here like me, but instead of king to d4, they take the pawn, and now I'm winning again. They can't do anything, but they play f4, and what now? Well, there's one way to just break open here, and that's h5. And when they take, they have doubled pawns that you're just going to gobble up. And if they push, then you just trade them off. And then you push these pawns down. So they decide to trade here. Now king to h6, going to take these pawns. King can't defend, but they play king to d4. And I'm taking the pawns. Just have to clear the way for these pawns here. And king to c5. Now e5 here, and we're just running it down. They can't stop it. They can trade pawns here, but they can't take it after king to d5 because I can just play f6. Now, anytime if their king just comes down here and takes this pawn cannot be stopped. So guaranteed victory royale now, and king to e4, trying to block my pawns, but king captures h4, a3, and king to g4. And now my king just clears the way for the pawn here. They can't make it down here fast enough. We'll trade pawns. Now the pawns block each other. f5, check, king moves, and we'll just run it down now. They try to go for my pawn here, but I'll just get a queen here, take their pawn, we'll get another queen, and we'll checkmate. They resign now, but there's a checkmate. Here's the moves it starts with. It's another Caro Kann, but this time they take the pawn, and I play e6, attacking the pawn with my bishop, and they defend it with b4. But now I play knight to c6, attacking the pawns, so they play bishop to b5, pinning my knight to the king. So I play bishop to d7, breaking the pin, and now the knight is attacking both the pawns again, so they take my knight, and after I take back with the bishop, they play knight to e2, and they're ready to castle, but I have not developed my knight or my bishop yet. And my best move is to target these pawns with something like a5 or b6, but I go for queen to c7, hitting the middle pawn, and they try to defend it with f4. A mistake apparently, and we'll see more about that later, because playing the f pawn is almost always a mistake because it weakens the king. So look out for that. But now, my turn, I want to finish developing, and I usually play knight to e7, but the knight here would block the bishop from coming out, so I play knight to h6. Because they played the f pawn forward, now the bishop is blocked, they can't take my knight and double up my pawns, which would weaken my position, so knight to h6 is okay, because then I can come knight to f5 or knight to g4 at some point. But b6 or a5 was best there, but after they castle, I finally find the right idea and play b6, because these pawns are too far forward, they can't actually defend them very well, but they'll try with bishop to e3, and after we trade, now they have a pawn here, undefended, and a couple weak solo pawns that I might target later. So first I'll play bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the rook, and also now I'm attacking this pawn here, which they can't do anything about. So they play knight to c3. But after I take the pawn with check, their only good move is king to h1, but I'm still at a slight advantage here. I'm thinking maybe the knight comes forward and the pawn comes down and the rook comes down, and we attack the king like that somehow, or I just castle and play safe and target these pawns. Should be a pretty easy game for me, but they think they can block with the rook. Maybe trying to break the pin here so they can move this knight at some point, but they forgot. Because my knight is on h6, because they played the f-pawn, I can play knight to g4, hitting the rook that is pinned to the king. But it's a mistake, because first I needed to take their knight with the bishop, because after they play queen to d4, blocking me from attacking the rook, I have to respond to this first, because my queen's not defended. And if I take their queen, then they take back with their knight, and my bishop's under attack twice, and then I'm about to get forked here, so it doesn't even matter that I'm about to take their rook. So I mess up here by not taking the knight first, but I want to keep the attack going, so I play queen to c6, defending my bishop here. After they take with the knight, I take back with the queen, but now I can't take the rook because knight to c3 and my queen is under attack, so I have to move the queen first, so I play queen to a5. Moving to safety here, but a good spot because it hits this pawn, hits the knight. I still have access to this diagonal, and if the knight moves, maybe access to the back rank checkmate. Just a lot of opportunity on the a5 square here, as we'll see after they move their rook back to f1. Maybe they think I'm just going to castle now, move my rooks over, and play a safe game. Maybe they think they have nothing to worry about, but there's no need for me to castle yet. I can just play rook to c8, hitting the knight twice here. And they have to play queen to a4 check here, best move, trade queens, and then my rook goes down, takes the pawn or something like that. Maybe knight to e3. But instead, rook to f3, they try to defend the knight here, but after rook to c4, queen's under attack, and they're in trouble now. Queen has to move off of this diagonal. Cannot go anywhere on the diagonal, so after queen goes to d3, now I have queen to c5 check, and this is basically game over here. And if the king goes to f1 here, then I'm going to play knight to h2 check, hitting the king and the rook. And after king to h1, knight to f2 check, forking the king and the queen. They have to take with the rook, take back with the queen, and I'm up +2, about to win the rest of the game here. All I have to do is castle, get my other rook up, and checkmate here. And I could also play queen to d4, hitting the knight twice, forcing a queen trade. So they tried to move their knight to b5 here, maybe going for some sort of check. No good though. I'll just castle now, and I'm going to bring the rook over, double up on the file here. But they want to defend this pawn here, so they play g3. And now just rook captures c2, and they can't stop checkmate unless they take the rook with the queen. So they resign now. Good game. Thanks for watching today's episode of The Bobby Bo Show. Smash the like button if you learned something. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Goodbye.